Hi guys, my name is Samir and welcome to my first Hibernate tutorial. And in this tutorial I'm gonna show you how to use Hibernate framework to insert a data in the database table. Now this is the most basic simple Hibernate application. Like here it is where it begins. So I'm gonna explain everything in detail, and all the other applications like insertion, deletions, updations and selections will be like similar. So starting off, first I want to use a database so that I can what you call insert data in the data table. So I'm logging in my database. I'm using Oracle 10G Express Edition database, and I'm going to insert a table in it. Alright, so my table is created now. Now I'll explain. I'm using a table called employee table, which is having 3 columns: ID, employee name, mobile and email. As you can see, ID over here is the primary key, and ename is of variable character type, mobile is of number type, and email is of variable character type of 20. So this table is created. Now I'm going to describe this table. So this is the description of the table. We have employee table and 4 columns: ID, ename, mobile and email. Now starting off with the program, I'm using the Eclipse IDE. Alright, it's taking time to open up. Alright, this is my Eclipse IDE. So alright, so I'm going to create a new project. So file, new. The project is gonna be Java project, and I'm gonna name my project Hibernate1, or I can write Hibernate Tutor 1 and finish. Alright, so I have my project available to me, source, and there's a source folder there. Now for every program we write to insert a data or to do something with our relational database, we need to first have a connection between our program and the database which we are using. For that, now in Hibernate we don't define connections as we used to do in JDBC. We have our configurations of connections and other thing in one XML file. In Hibernate configuration, we have to use 2 XML files. But let's starting off, first we need to have a connection so that we can connect to our database, and for this we need to configure like what is our database you're using, what's the URL, what's the username, password. So where is this thing configured? These things are configured in an XML file that is called the Hibernate configuration file. So I say new, other, I type here XML, and it's going to be XML file. Next. Now, the naming convention, there is some specific naming convention we have to use for the Hibernate configuration file. The naming convention is it should have .cfg, .xml naming convention. This is important. If you don't give this extension to your file name, it won't work. The file name can be anything. For now, I use Hibernate. So my configuration file name is hibernate.cfg.xml. Now, .cfg.xml is a compulsory extension. This thing can be anything. Instead of Hibernate, you can give any name, but you must give .cfg.xml extension, or else the Hibernate framework won't understand that this is the configuration file. So now, we finish it. Now we have the XML DTD. Now we need to write a DTD for the configuration file. So we need to write one more DTD so that it can understand that this is the configuration file. Now, where to get the DTD? As we all know, we have to use Hibernate distribution 3.5.6 final. So I'm gonna open the Hibernate distribution, and in that I have some jars and some folders. So I go to the project folder, and then I go to the core folder, source, main, resources, organization, Hibernate, and there I have the two DTD files for the two XML files we'll be going to use. Right now I'm writing the Hibernate configuration file. So I need the DTD, this one, for this file. So what I do is I open it up in my Eclipse browser. Now it's open. I just close this. Now this is the DTD which I need to use in my configuration file. So copy it and paste it here. Now I'm gonna see that it's in one line, space over here, and this too. Sometimes if you don't keep this in one line, it doesn't work. So just keep it in one line, and there's supposed to be space in between this and in between this. That's compulsory. Now let's write our XML files to configure the connections and other things. Now, starting off, first thing I press Control space, and you see Hibernate configuration. This is compulsory. The Hibernate configuration file starts with this. That is, it starts with the DTD name, doc type name. That's going to be the first tab in every file we use. Now, press Control space again, we get Session Factory. That's going to be the next one. Now, in the Session Factory, we write various properties where we configure the connection. Now, let's say I'm writing a command. Now, this is for writing connecting to the database. Now I'm going to write some configurations, some properties that are going to help me to connect to my database, that's the Oracle 10G XE edition, and to my table. Now for that I need to write some property. Alright, so what's the value here going to be, and what value should have? What should be the property name, and what should be the property value? Now, in our Hibernate distribution folder, we have documentation library project. The Hibernate distribution framework provides it with built configurations for connecting to our database. Like, I'll show you how. We have the project folder, and you have the etc folder, and there you have a properties file called the hibernate.properties file. Now this properties file contains all the properties that we can use in our configuration file. So I'm going to open the properties file in my editor. I'm closing it. Now I open the properties file. Now see here, as I goes down, there are various database names available: Hypersonic SQL, H2 database, MySQL database, and Oracle database, which I'm using. So what it is, see, we have two divisions in this. There's a space, and this side of it is a property name, and this side of it, it's the property value. So that means if I'm going to use MySQL database, I have to declare these properties, and they are going to have the respective property values. Now I'm going to use the Oracle database, so there are some various property names and some property values which we have to use. For example, I'll start first with the driver class. Now the property name for the driver class is hibernate.connection.driver class, and this is the value. So I copy this and paste it here in my property name. Now the property value is going to be oracle.jdbc driver.oracle driver. Copy this and paste it. Now the next property, Now the next property I'm going to use is the hibernate.connection.url and the localhost. This is the property name. Now you can choose which you want to use. You are using a Oracle enterprise version, or using the express version, and what's your number and all. You can check it out, and you can change the URL based on your need. So hibernate.connection.url, and I paste it here, and the value, I copy the value, jdbc.1522, copy this and paste it here. For me it's 1521, so I'm going to change it to 1521. Now the next property which I have to use is the dialect, Oracle 10G dialect. Now what does the dialect means? See, the SQL language we use in MySQL and the SQL language we use in Oracle may differ in syntax in a small way. So now the Hibernate framework generates the SQL statements for us. We don't have to write complex nested queries and complex. We don't need to know SQL to use Hibernate framework. That was the point of the Hibernate framework, that one programmer, the Java programmer, may not necessarily know SQL programming. So the Hibernate framework generates a query by itself, based on what framework you're using and based on using that particular. Like if we are using Oracle 10G dialect, it will generate the SQL query which supports the Oracle 10G versions. Now if I use the MySQL dialect, it will generate the SQL query on which will work on the MySQL database. So I have to declare my dialect next. Hibernate.dialect, copy this, that's the property name, and the value is going to be Oracle Hibernate organization is this one. Paste it. Alright, now my driver class is done, my URL is done, my dialect is done. Now I have to define my username and password. Now this username and password refers to the username and password which I used to log in my Express Edition server, Oracle server, and my table, created my table. So the one which I used to log in. So I'm going to copy the username, copy it, and create a property. And the username is going to be Samir, and I'm going to create one more property, and it's going to have the value password. Done. Now I enter my username and password. My connection is complete. It requires 5 properties to connect to the database. Now this is over with the connection. Now I want to disable the auto commit mode. Now, why I'm going to do that? Basically, for running the program, this is enough. You just need to connect to the database and then you can do whatever you want. And you need to have one more thing called transaction that you need to declare, but the connection is this much. Now, another thing I'm going to do here is I want to disable my auto commit mode. Why am I going to do that? Imagine in a program or in a class or in a transaction, I have some what you call transactions or some more than one SQL query running. I'm saying SQL query, but imagine I have more than one what you call updation on my database going on. For example, I have a program called transfer.class or something like that, in which I remove 100 I remove money from my account and transfer it to my friend's account. Simple. So what I'm doing here is, for example, alright, I have my account and my friend's account. Imagine I have $1,000 in my account. Alright, I have 1,000 and my friend has 500. Okay, 500. Now, when I'm transferring money from my account to his account, first thing, imagine I want to transfer $100 from my account to my friend's account. So, imagine the first query that we run is to remove $100 from my account. So my account becomes 900, and the second query that runs is to increase amount, to add amount in his account, 600. Now, suppose I have auto commit enabled. What happens if, for example, for some reason this was 1,000 before, now my $100 get deducted and his is 500. Now $100 are deducted from my account and they're supposed to be added to my friend's account, but as it is auto committed, when the amount 100 got deducted from my account, alright, it's committed, so this is final, this won't change. Now that money have to be added to my friend's account, that's Deepak's account. Now imagine due to some circumstances this did not work, the money did not get added to my friend's account, there was some error, some server error or some kind of error. Now what happens? It's auto committed, so I won't get my money back, he won't get his what you call amount updated, and that money is lost. So that's why generally we commit this both transactions together, that is after the 900 have been money have been removed and the amount have been added in one single query, we will commit it. That's the point. So for that reason, generally it's a good practice to set auto commit false or auto commit disabled. Now I'm writing what we need to do it, set it disabled, auto commit false. This is the comment, don't be mistake. Alright, so I have again property name. So see, this hibernate.properties file contains everything you need to write the hibernate.configuration file. It has everything. For example, now I'm doing the auto commit thing. So I want to search what am I supposed to, what's the property which I'm going to use to disable the auto commit. I press Ctrl F. Alright, auto commit, and find it. See, here it is. Hibernate.connection.autocommit is true. This is a property name, this is a property value. So I'm going to use this property name, copy and paste it here, and I'm going to set this to false. Alright, done. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, for explaining you people, alright, sorry, alright, for explaining you guys how Hibernate generates or how Hibernate creates the SQL query by itself using the 10G dialect, I'm going to write few properties which are going to enable us to see the SQL statement generated by the Hibernate framework in our console when we run the program. Alright, so for that, to display SQL query generated when running the program, I need few lines, property names and property values. You can search them up in the hibernate.properties file, but I'll type it down. First one, show underscore SQL value true. That's very easy. Now the SQL generated query, which will be shown now, I want it to be formatted, that is in a proper format. So for that I use property name and I use format underscore SQL and I'm setting it to true. Now next one, property, I want it to display comments while showing me the SQL query. So for that I use underscore SQL underscore comments and set it to true. Finished. These three SQL properties you need to display the SQL. Actually you need only one. These two are not necessary to display the SQL query in our console. Now next thing I'm going to do is I have to actually write the JDBC transaction query. So I have to use a property for JDBC transaction. So what is it going to be? Now there's something called JDBC transaction, as everybody have been hearing it out. So for that we'll use some proper. Alright, now continuing, I need to configure my JDBC transaction. So for that I need to write using for JDBC transaction. This is a command, and I have to use again property name, and you can search this up in the .properties file. And right now I know the name, so I'm going to type it down. Hibernate dot Hibernate dot transaction dot factory underscore class, and its value going to be org dot hibernate dot transaction dot JDBC capital transaction capital transaction and factory. Now finished. Now the simple understanding of how does the Hibernate framework works is we have a class, a Java. You know, every class have some variables and some methods. Now what we do is we have these columns and this is our table name. So we use a similar structure to define a class. That's actually the bean class, and in Hibernate we call it the Pojo class. So I'll be calling that class which is used the Pojo class. Plain old Java object, which Pojo stands for. So the plain old Java object class actually is having kind of similar structure to this table which we are going to use. What it does is, as a table name we have the class name, and for the ID column names we have the variables. Like for ID we may have a variable with some name which is of type integer, and ename of type string, and mobile of type string or integer long, email of type string. So what we do is we map these columns in our database to the variables in our class. So for that, we have to write somewhere that employee table is mapped to some particular class, ID column is mapped, actually we do it in the reverse way. We map the class to the table and we map the variables to the columns. So we have some class, imagine we have some employee class. So employee class is mapped to employee table. We have to write somewhere that employee class is mapped to employee table, and the variable employee class is having the ID variable of integer type is mapped to the ID column of the employee table, and so on. Now this mapping is done in one more XML file called the mapping file, the Hibernate mapping file. And in the configuration file, we have to write where the mapping file is available, or what is the name of the mapping file which we are going to use. So for that purpose, we need to actually write the mapping file. So mapping file, I want to write a comment, mapping file. Now this is for mapping file. Property name, I did a mistake, it's not property, it's mapping, and then I have to use something called resource, and here in this I have to write the mapping file. What's the name of my mapping file? Since for now we have not generated a mapping file, I'll write it when I generate the mapping file. Alright, so with this, our configuration file is done. That is, the thing we need to connect to our database is done. Now let's move on. Now the next thing we need is, for writing the program, is we need the class to map these columns. So let's create a class, create new a class with the name employee class, and it's not going to contain any main method, so just finish it. So I have the employee class. Now the Pojo class, or the class which we use to map to our database, must implement serializable. Why? Because we may have multiple sessions, and we know a serializable object can run in multiple threads. So we may have more than one session or a program which we may write, or if you're writing a program which is run by many users, then it may have multiple sessions. For that purpose, we have to or must implement it to be serializable. Now next thing, now let's create the variables. Int, the first one is the ID, so I'm going to create int ID. It's private int ID. Then I'm going to create private string name or ename name. Just let me check. There is ename mobile email. Alright, private string name, then mobile private long mobile, and then private string email. Done. Now the Pojo class, the class which we are going to use for mapping, should have an empty constructor defined in itself. So let's define an empty constructor. Public employee, and is going to be empty. Finished. Now let's write setter and getter methods for these four variables. Right click, source, generate getters and setters for all these four. Okay, so this is all I need in my Pojo class. This is finished. So now I have my Hibernate.configuration file, I have my Pojo class created. I don't need the .properties file, so I close it. Now I have created the two things. Now there are two more things remaining which I need to create. One is a mapping file where I map these variables to the table which I used in the to the columns in the database. Now the other thing I need to write is there are four things you need to write when you when you use the Hibernate application. First is the two configuration files, two XML files, you may say two XML files, and one Pojo class, and one the class where you write the logic. That is where you're performing the insertion. So now we have to map this to our database. So let's write the next XML file. Remember, in Hibernate framework we use two XML files. We are done with the configuration file where we actually configured the connection to connect to our database. Now let's write the mapping file, the other XML file, where we'll map these variables to the column names in the database table and this class to the table name in the database. So next, create new other XML file. Next, now as the configuration file had some naming convention that it was configuration file must have .cfg.xml extension. Similarly, the mapping file, the Hibernate mapping file, the XML file also have a specific naming extension, that is it must have .hbm, which stands for Hibernate mapping .xml extension. This extension is compulsory. The name we can have before it can be anything. So for now let's use employee emp. I can use anything. I'm simply using emp. emp.hbm.xml is my mapping file name. This extension is compulsory. This can be anything. Now finish it. Now this name I have to update in my configuration file where I left a blank. I told that when I'll write the mapping file I'll update it here. So this is going to be emp.hbm.xml. This is done. Now let's write our mapping file. Now like the configuration file, I first wrote the DTD, document type declaration, for the configuration file. Similarly, I need to write the document type declaration for my Hibernate mapping file. Now for that, let's minimize this and open our Hibernate distribution 3.5.6 final version. Go to the project and project core source main resources organization Hibernate, and the other, last time we used the configuration DTD, now we have to use the mapping DTD. So the mapping DTD, we have to copy this DTD, copy it and paste it in our EMP. Right now I'm going to arrange it in one line. And arrange this in one line. See, there's a space. Alright, this is the DTD part is done. So let's close this. Now write the DTD in a similar fashion how we wrote our mapping configuration file. Control Z, control space. The first name gonna be the document type name which we used. So control space Hibernate mapping, enter. Now class. Now what we are doing in our mapping file, we are mapping this class, the employee.java class, to the table. So obviously class means the class name, the class which we are going to map. This is a class which we are going to map and it has the name employee. So this class we are going to map to the database table. So class, it has few attributes. Now space, control space, we have name. This is going to be the name of the class. Now my name of the class is employee.java, so I'm going to type employee, and then I have table Now, simple enough. You have the class name and you have the table you want to map it with. Table refers to the table, this table, employee table with a capital EMP. Anyhow, this is case insensitive. I mean the Oracle SQL version is case insensitive, but for showing the distinction between what is the database object and what's the class object, I'll write it in capitals. Employee. So this is a table in our database in my user type, and this is the class, and I'm mapping them both. Now class is done. Inside the class, now I have to map these variables. How shall I do that? Since ID is the private, ID variable is the primary key in that table, so I'm going to declare it as ID, which is generally declared for the primary key. So I have ID, then again I have name. This name refers to the variable name in my class, that's ID with small I and D. Alright, then there's gonna be column name. This column name refers to the column in my table, that is capital ID. Alright, so that is capital ID. Now I'm declaring this as ID because this ID means its primary key, it has unique value. So ID, and then I have something called type. So I have something called type. Now this type refers to neither this type, neither this type. It refers to something known as the Hibernate type. Now Hibernate configuration has some specific types so that we can map between the Java type available and we can map between the SQL type number. For example, if we have int here and number here, I have to use a Hibernate type called as integer with a small I. It's like in Hibernate types, if you have a capital string, there's a string with small s. If you have an integer in Java with this I, in Hibernate type is gonna be integer with a small I. I will probably provide the list of Hibernate types available in the document later. For now, let's say this is the integer type. There are a list of available Hibernate types, and I'll keep the list in my blog soon enough. Now this is the integer type. Finished. Now I have to use something called generator class assigned. That means I'm going to assign them individually rather than, because since it's a primary key. For example, take an example of a receipt which cashier prints every time you buy something. The receipt number is generally not assigned, it's self-generated, right? He don't type the receipt number, add one number next time. It's always self-generated receipt number. So generator class is actually a method how you do that self-generation of primary key. But for now, let's say we use it assigned, and we'll see more about this in later. Alright, so that's the generator class, and our ID column is done. That was a primary column. It's done. Primary variable name ID is mapped to the column ID, and the class is mapped accordingly. Now the other variables. For other variables, I use property. I don't need to use ID. Property name is, see the property name, next property name is name, N-A-M-E, and the property column is ename. Sorry, alright, it's a good example. You see, it can have different names. I can use capitals so that you know this is from the database. Ename. Alright, so, and the type, obviously. type is going to be, we have string type with the smallest. Now this is done. Now remaining objects, new Control Z, I don't know what I did. Alright, property, next name. What's my property name? The next one, it's mobile with long type. So mobile with column. Column is gonna be this column, mobile, it's same name. Now the type is going to be the Hibernate type, so that Hibernate can map it. Type is long. Alright, type is long. And then what's remaining? The last one, I think. Yeah, that's email. Let's go with email. Property, email, just check the spelling. It's email with email, and the column is email. This should be this. Alright, email, and the type is string. Alright, this is finished. Now I have my class all perfectly mapped with my database. So this is over. Just check it out once more. I have class name, and in the class I'm closing the class here, opening here, and in between that I have my columns, my variables mapped to the columns, and they have the type assigned and the column and the name. Alright, finished. Save this. Now what do we need? We need to run the program, and we need to write the main logic. So let's create a new class now. New, the last thing, the fourth thing. Class insert employee. This is some name, and it's going to have the void main method since it will be running. So public class insert employee, public static void main string arguments. Now before running, we are using the Hibernate distribution 3.5.6 final version. So obviously we have to use the jars provided by it, like we have to use this 3 Hibernate testing, and we have to use required jars, and we have to use the optional, we don't need to use the optional jars. We need to use this, and you need to use the JDBC jar available from your database. For example, in my database I use this OJDBC14_G. Where is it available? Go to my computer, see, I have Oracle XC, application Oracle, product 10.2.0, and server, and you have something called JDBC here, and in the library you have the jars which are used to connect to the database. So you have to use this jar. And if you are using some other server, MySQL, and you will have similar structure there, and in the JDBC folder on that database you'll have the jar. The jars are provided by the database vendor themselves, so that we can connect our Java program to the database. So you have to use this jar. So what I did was, instead of every time for going in this distribution folder and project and and adding them separately, library required, adding this all separately, I kept all my jars which I'm going to use in a single folder. This is all the jars which I'm going to use, and this one too along with them. In this program we won't be using this P6 spy, and other than that you need everything. So DOM actually is used to parse the XML file, and so we need these jars. So start with the program, and now let's click the project and say properties and build paths, add external jars, and I go to the folder where I kept all my jars and just add all of them, open them, and one more jar which was on my desktop, that was the open it. Okay, finished. Now all my jars are added. I need to actually write this program. Now the first thing we need to create, there's a specific 4 file lines which are supposed to be same for all the Hibernate programs. So see this 4 file lines clearly. First thing I'm going to create a configuration object so that I can configure my configuration file and tell it where it's available. So I press Control space and I say get configuration. Okay, yeah. Now see, I get configuration. There are 2 configurations available. One is Java X security.authentication.login, which I'm not going to use. What I'm going to use over here is configuration org.hibernate.cfg. Alright, so this is the configuration I'm going to use. It imported the configuration file from the Hibernate package. So configuration object is equal to new configuration. Alright, now using this configuration object, what I want to do is I want to configure my hibernate.cfg.xml file. So what I'll do is configure cfg.configure. What am I supposed to configure? I'm supposed to configure my hibernate.cfg.xml file. Now I have configured my hibernate.cfg.xml configuration file. Now what I need to do is I need to create an object called session factory. Alright, SF is equal to one session factory contains multiple sessions. Build cfg dot build session factory. Then using this session factory objects, I create a session sf dot session objects session. There are many sessions. We use our organization Hibernate session, not the classic one. Alright, session s equals sf dot open session. Alright, then finally you have a transaction tx equals s dot begin transaction. Alright, so this is the 5 lines code, or actually yeah, it's 5 line code which you need to run any what you call Hibernate file. Or you have to have this 5 lines of code before you do anything with the database. Now what do? I'll be inserting the data, but I won't write any SQL query. I'll simply insert it. How? You're gonna see this. Now what I'm going to do is, I know that right now the configuration file is configured. I know that session factory is build a session. I have a available transaction with me. Now when I say Hibernate file is configured, that means I have my Pojo class mapped to the database. So I don't need to write any SQL query to actually run my commands or perform some manipulation from the command line like SQL. I'll simply use my class that's available to me, the Pojo class, because I know it's already mapped. So I create the class object employee emp equals new employee, empty constructor which we declared. Alright, employee emp equals new employee. Now I'm using the session employee emp dot set id. Now this id I'm gonna keep 1, then emp dot set name Jacob. Alright, some name Jack. Alright, Jack. emp dot set mobile, that's 4445544. Alright, emp dot set email, that is xyz to the rate of xzxy.com. Alright, let's keep this small. I don't know how much length I kept there. So these are my four variables: id, name, mobile, email. id, name, mobile, email. Alright, now I have assigned them some particular values. Now I want them to be saved in my database. So what do? I say s.save what? Employee object. Alright, now when I say s.save employee object, what it does is it saves the employee object so that it can be mapped. But now, till now, the transaction is not committed, nor is it available in our database. So we need to write something called, we need to commit this transaction, because we disable the auto commit mode, so that is important too. So we have s.employee, we have s.flush. Now when I say s.flush, what happens is the SQL query for insertion of these values in the database is generated. The SQL query for inserting these values 1 Jack 44555544 is generated, so that the value is inserted in this table. Alright, so SQL query is generated. Now when I say tx.commit, the transaction is actually committed. Then s.close, I close the session and everything is closed, so I don't have to worry about memory management and stuff. Hibernate takes care of everything, the Hibernate framework. So this is done. Let's run it to check it out whether it inserts the data. Alright, so let's run this program, a Java application, and it's running. Oh, I got an error, so let's see. Could not determine the type for string at table employee for column email. Oh, I did a mistake. Somewhere I wrote string in my Hibernate configuration file. Oh, it's going to be string. Now clear this off. Okay, now let's run it again. So run as Java applications, save all. Okay, alright, there's one more error, so let's check what it is. Explanation in main thread, wait, caused by org.hibernate.tng.dialect. I left the T over there, it's T. Alright, save this, Control S. Now let's clear this off and run it again. Alright guys, let's run it again. Run as Java application. Now let's see. Alright, one more error. I think I did some typing mistakes. Alright, what's the error now? Let's go up. Alright, the error is in JDBC transaction factory. Alright, see in the configuration file JDBC dot. Alright, there's some very big mistake over here. Factory. Save it, Control S, and let's see what happens now. Clear this off, clear it, and run it again. Run as Java application. Hopefully it should work now. Alright, see. Now, since we use the configuration of some, we use this to display SQL query. Now our SQL query is displayed. Insert into what we are doing, we are inserting into employee table. These are the comments, since we say use SQL underscore comments. Now it's in formatted way, insert into employee, e-name, mobile, email, and ID. This is not going to be shown for security purpose. Values, these are the column names, and the values are question mark, question mark, question mark, and question mark. Alright, so let's check our database and see whether the values are updated. open our database. Alright, select star from employees, run. Oh come on, employee or employees, run. Alright, yeah, employee. So the table is visible. ID1, email, ename tag, mobile, email. Does it match? We inserted ID1, name tag, mobile, email. Let's enter second value and something new. Let's say Ronnie and not D 9, and let's say ABC at the rate of abc.com. Now run this. Alright, okay, successful. Select star from employee, run again. See, you have the second ID, ename, mobile. So this is how Hibernate framework works. Simply, you what's the main basic, or what's the most what you call easiest way to explain it is, you simply have a class, and that class is mapped to the table, and that's how you insert the data. You don't need to write any SQL query for running or modifying your database. And probably in the next tutorial I'm going to show you how to select a row from the database into and display it in our Java program, and how to perform update and other stuffs. So for now, thank you for watching this tutorial, and I hope it helped you to understand Hibernate better. Thank you.